statement, even though one of them is obviously false because it's a fiction created by a computer program, and the second one has been said by somebody who people look up to and who agree to the person's point of view. But even then, I cannot distinguish between these two statements. For me, they are equally false or equally true. So pseudoscience and science is sometimes like this. You cannot really distinguish between what is science and what is pseudoscience. And in this talk, I hope to sort of give you some idea about what sort of distinguishing elements exist, and how you can make up your mind about certain things that has been told to you as facts by some people. All right, so I encourage you to take a look at this website. It's a very fun website. It's called wisdomofdeepakchopra.com, I think. And you can just, refresh this page, and then it will show you something else. So anyway, all right. So to understand what is pseudoscience, it's necessary to know what is science. So I think that all of you are studying science, if some of you are here who are not currently studying, then you have at least taken some courses in science, be it in school or elsewhere. So a very quick overview of what is science. So science is quite old in the sense that modern scientific thinking or science as we know it developed more than 2,000 years ago. And it traces back to ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and then to the Greek civilizations. So it's the word science comes from the word the Latin for language, the Latin for knowledge, and it was a system of knowledge that was propagated by the Greeks, and which we now call it science. So the Greeks are credited with giving birth to science, but they had a lot of help from many other civilizations like ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even further away towards the east. So it's not a very concrete sort of birth that we can pinpoint exactly that this is the birth of science, but across many civilizations and across many millennia, across many centuries, science has developed. So there were parallel developments also in the Islamic world, in China, and in India as well. But these are not as well studied as the Greek. Well, okay, it's not. Again, this is a very very subjective approach. So I would say that Indian science, as we know, Greek science, if we compare them, then I would have to say that Greek science has been studied quite a lot compared to Indian science. So anyway, I don't want to say that it's entirely the Greeks, but there were also developments in Islamic world, in China and in India. But the key point is that there is a difference between technology and science. So earlier, before the Greeks, people were using technology. For example, people had the wheel, and people knew how to pump water, for example, and people knew how to, shoot at enemies using the concept of parabolic motion and things like that. So these were examples of technology. This was not science because they did not know how. They knew just to do the thing. So what to do they knew, but they did not know why or how that thing that they're doing is correct. So the Greeks, they took this technology of others and they created science out of it. So they explained why this thing works. At least they tried to explain why this thing works. Most of the time, their explanations were not correct. They had to be modified later on by several other scientists, but at least they tried to explain the why of the thing. After the decline of this Greek science from the later Roman age, from around 200 to 300 AD onwards, the Islamic and Arabic science, they took on the mantle. And again, there was this transfer of knowledge from the East this time to the West. And earlier it was like sort of from the West to the East. So there might be many questions about this because it's sort of like a one-slide explanation to how science developed. So why Greeks? That might be one question. And there are many reasons, but some of the prominent reasons that philosophers of science think helped or contributed to this development is that the Greeks had a non-hierarchical society with religious freedom, with freedom of expressions, and they had a lot of leisure time because there were a lot of slaves. the rich people had a lot of slaves, and they did not have any work to do. So there was a lot of free time. And in those free times, they studied different things. They tried to explain various things. They had time for experimentation. They had money for experimentation and so on. But the important point is that there was religious freedom and freedom of expression. So you could say certain things where you don't have to fear repercussions from the ruling elite or from the religious clergy or something like that. So which gradually deteriorated a bit, but I don't want to go into those things. So another point which is quite important to take from this slide is that the Greeks, they did not invoke myths, but they created theories. So to explain, for example, how maybe like seasons change, they did not say that, okay, some god was angry and then it rained because of that god's anger or something like that. So they tried to create a theory of movement of the earth or something like that. So that was a difference between earlier civilizations and the Greeks. And that is how science sort of started. So along with science, it is also very important to know what is the scientific method for every kind of experiment or for every kind of scientific field. This science which would be something called meta science. Get that. I have not talked at all about problems with statistics, how statistical analysis occurs in this scientific method. Where is the connection between statistical analysis and how science is done and so on? And what are the beliefs and biases that people take? So I'm going to speak about little bit about the biases when you go to pseudoscience, but these are certain issues with science that exist, and we need to be careful. So now let's come to what is pseudoscience. It's not that anything which is not science is pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is something which is purported to be science, but it's not science. It's a false belief that it is a science. So those sort of things are called pseudoscience. And so it's a very difficult problem to understand what is science and what is pseudoscience. So to give an idea of how one can distinguish pseudoscience, let me just mention one idea of Karl Popper, who was a famous Austrian philosopher of science. He then moved to New Zealand. But anyway, so Karl Popper's idea was that not all science is equal. So, in the sense that he gave two examples. One is of relativity by Einstein, and the other is of psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud. And interestingly, Karl Popper attended both Einstein and Freud's lectures when he was in Vienna. So he really met both of them and then had the first-hand experience of getting training from these people. So according to Popper, these two scientific fields, okay, if you want to call scientific fields, relativity and psychoanalysis are not the same. So they are not equal. And I'm not going to go into details why he thinks that. So it's okay, it will be too much. The next thing is, which I mentioned about falsifiability. So he gave an example, and it's also a very normal example to think about. And that example is about Einstein's theory and astrology. So Einstein's theory, I have already said that there are two things. So two predictions which were falsifiable using Einstein's theory. So one was this bending of light rays, and the other was this existence of the planet Vulcan. But if you look at astrology, the things are not falsifiable. So if you say that, okay, the people who were born in this certain zodiac sign, under this certain zodiac sign, for them today will be auspicious, then it is not falsifiable, because out of thousands and thousands of people, somebody might have an auspicious day, but it does not mean that that particular sentence is true for everybody. So it's not really falsifiable. You say that so if an astrologist says that after 10 years, something will happen in your life, and he gives a concrete example. So that thing might happen before 10 years. And if that happens before 10 years, is it true, whatever was predicted by astrology? So it's not really clear how you would falsify some of these predictions. So somebody might say that you will go to study in the south, but south is like an entire direction. So it's 1/4 of the places. So you can either go north, east, west, or south. So it's really meaningless if you try to falsify that statement. So Tezpur would be south of Shillong would be south of Tezpur, and would you say that, okay, you have gone to study in Shillong, so whatever was predicted was true? And somebody might argue that no, by south you mean you have to go to the southern India, Others might, so I might say that no, by South, I would mean that you have to go to South America, for example, so, or to the southern hemisphere. So these are not falsifiable statements. The next thing which I have already touched upon is universality, or so your experiment has to be able to be replicated in different places of the world. And a very recent example is that IISc room temperature superconductivity phenomena. So, I mean, it's not really a problem with universality. It's more a problem with correct data keeping and things like that. But that's a good example. So because there was this big news that scientists in IISc, they have found room temperature superconductivity, and it's a big deal because it's thought to be a very difficult problem. And people try to do the experiment. So what they try to, so people try to replicate, or people try to look at the data, and then they found that there were some problems. So they could not really get the same results that the people in IISc did. And because of that, their theory was not correct. So they had to modify their paper and so on. So there are other aspects of science which is missing in this whole pseudoscience paradigm. One of them is replication. So if you say something, it's not really always possible to replicate that in a different place for a different person. The other thing is peer review. So if you want your scientific theory to be accepted, then others have to look at it and then agree that your theory is correct. So this is sort of like this is called a peer review. In pseudoscience, this is entirely missing. So they don't want really experts or other people to look at whatever they have and give an opinion. And even if they allow people to give an opinion, they don't really agree to most of the negative opinions that they receive. The third issue is about data recording and sharing. So in science, it is always imperative and it is always important that you are open about your data sources and how you are collecting data, how you are analyzing the data, and how you are going to share that data or how you are going to store that data. But in pseudoscience, all of these aspects are completely missing. So another aspect of pseudoscience is that it makes exaggerated claims, and science doesn't make exaggerated claims. So, I mean, at least most of them don't make exaggerated claims. So you cannot really say that I have cured cancer. You can say that, okay, I have made an advancement which might be possible that it will help in a certain respect, that it might cure cancer. So you'd say something like that. But in pseudoscience, people will make really exaggerated claims. For example, you will hear, or I'm sure that you have seen these posters, because when I was young, I used to live in Tezpur when I was young. So we had these newspapers, and from time to time in the newspapers, there would be these pamphlets inside, and these were like advertisements from some Baba or Guru who used to come, and then it would claim like really exaggerated things, like I can solve your alcohol drinking problem in 2 days, or I can solve your medical health issues in 5 days, or something like that. So these are really exaggerated claims. I mean, nobody, as far as I know, nobody has been cured of alcoholism in 2 days. So science does not make these sort of claims. It's always pseudoscience who would make that sort of exaggerated claims. Then there is the problem with conformal or confirmation bias. So in science, it's very important that you are open about your biases, and you think carefully before you embark on an experiment. You think carefully about what your biases are regarding that. So in many of these, many of the journal papers that are written and published, there is a box where you have to write about conflicts of interest. So if you have taken money from a pharmaceutical company, and if you are testing that pharmaceutical company product, then it's a conflict of interest. So people have to mention that whenever you are doing science, something like that. But in pseudoscience, it's completely like out of the question that a conflict of interest or your confirmation biases would be mentioned. So a very nice example of this confirmation bias is a recent calendar by IIT Kharagpur. So IIT Kharagpur has this center for Indic research or something like that, and they announced a calendar. They launched a calendar in the end of December about the Aryan invasion theory of India. So these are like things which have been widely studied. For example, the theory that people from outside India came to India and settled and so on, or the other way that people from India, so the people in India are indigenous to this land, and then they went outside and settled other colonies. So these are two different aspects, and both of them have been studied properly by scientists, by paleogeneticists, by paleoanthropologists, and by other experts using many sophisticated techniques, including like DNA analysis and things like that. And whatever they have found, it's already quite well known and well respected, and it's considered to be correct that there was no like this theory that Indians were indigenous to the places that we're inhabiting. There were a lot of intermixing, and there were a lot of people who came from outside and intermixed with each other. So the IIT Kharagpur calendar, they discarded all of these theories, and then they gave an explanation for all of these in different. So like each month had sort of like a picture, and then that picture was explained why that picture discards this theory that people from outside came to India or something like that. And that is an example of confirmation bias, because when they were doing, so there was no new research which was quoted, okay? So when they were doing this calendar making, or when they were doing the research, they had already this preconception in their mind that people from outside did not mix with India. So whatever is there, it's ours and so on. So if you have this preconceived notion, then it's very easy to see that reflected in, so it's not always the case. So there are many more issues. For example, there is this tendency to believe in provably false events if people of authority say that something is true. And then there is, so this I have highlighted a lot of times, that there is a lack of proper trials, and this is particularly problematic for homeopathy. Then there is this irrefutable theories. So you cannot really refute them. I mean, somebody might say that I have found the elixir of life, and I have been drinking it for 10 years and I have not died. So this is not a proof, because many people live for 10 years without having any issues. So some things like this, some theories like this are not really scientific, and you would not be able to refute them or prove them. Then there is this concept of Occam's razor. So it's another very difficult to grasp, I would say, philosophical concept. So which says that entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. So to explain certain things, for example, if you see, if you hear a sound in your outside your door, then you should not assume that it's some ghost who is making that noise. So there might be perfectly reasonable explanations for that. So so there might be a wind draft which is coming and hitting the door and then making that noise, or something was loose, some bolt was loose, and then it just fell on the ground or something like that. So there are multiple reasons why it might be true. So you should not really make leaps of imagination out of these ordinary happenings and come to a conclusion which is not scientific. So, and this list will go on and on. So there are many more issues which I won't really speak about now. But I want to reiterate one point, and that point is that this problem of differentiating between science and pseudoscience is very difficult. So this is called the demarcation problem in the philosophy of science, and it's a very difficult problem. And people have been studying this problem for at least 100 years, and there is still, I would say, there is still not really consensus. So yeah. Anyway, so I mean, philosophy in general is a very complicated subject, but this demarcation problem is quite a difficult problem. So I have already spoken about some of the examples. Let me go a little bit more about this, about giving some like personal experiences of these examples. So the first pseudoscientific subject that everyone here comes in contact with is astrology. And really after the 19th century, there are no grounds for people to believe in astrology, because astronomy and astrophysics have made such progress that I don't think astrology has any grounds. And also the other reason is that they have failed to update whatever they are doing, because I mean, 2000 years ago, the zodiac arrangement of the zodiac in the sky was completely different from what it is now. It has shifted. So I mean, if you are designated as a Capricorn now, it's not necessary that 2000 years ago you would have been a Capricorn or something like that. No? So sorry, I'm saying the other way. So 2000 years ago, if somebody was a Capricorn, it's not necessary that that person has to be a Capricorn now. This has not been changed. So, but that is a very minor issue. The main issue is that there is no really scientific ground for astrology. the next example is homeopathy, which I have mentioned many times. So homeopathy, these are really biochemically inert compounds that they give you. So there is nothing really in that. It's just sugar pills that you take, and it makes no difference. So there are two major principles of homeopathy. So the first is that like kills like. So whatever that might mean. And the second is that if you keep on diluting the things, whatever like is in water, and if you keep on diluting and diluting in the second principle. So now it is asking for the question. So let us do a series of calculations to estimate the amount of supposed medicinal molecules in a typical homeopathic solutions. So homeopathic arsenic oxide as a treatment for digestive disorders and anxiety. In their vocabulary, it is called arsenicum album. And it was also touted as a cure for COVID at some point. Anyway, so the oxide is prepared industrially by roasting arsenic-containing ores such as arsenopyrite in air. The other products form iron oxide and sulfur dioxide. So now, this is the question. So in homeopathy, a decimal scale is often used to specify the dilution of a given sample, 1 in 10. Then one part of the solution has been further diluted, 1 in 10, giving a 1 in 100 dilution and so on. Okay. So a D6 would be 1 in 10 to the power 6. Or a D100 would be 1 in 10 to the power 100 dilution. So arsenicum album is often sold as a D30 preparation. So which means it has been diluted 1 part in 10 to the power 30. Now, the question is something like this. No? So, for example, if you focus on F, it says that the total volume of water on the Earth is estimated to be about 1.4 into 10 to the power 9 kilometer cube, which is the volume. If our stock solution at the start is 1 liter of saturated solution, what is the maximum dilution of the entire stock solution one can achieve by utilizing all of this water? So, if you do this calculation, you will see that even if you use all of the water in the world, you cannot really go to 10 to the power 30 dilution and have something remaining of that product. So it also makes a note which says that in reality, more than 97% of the water is salt water, which is not usable. So basically, it's 3% of this 1.4 into 10 to the power 9 cubic kilometer. So anyway, so if you do this calculation, you will see that whatever they are claiming is absolutely nonsense according to like simple mathematics and chemistry. So this is an example of how homeopaths really don't do science. I don't know if they do this calculation when they're studying or not, but it's really not science. So why it fails to be science, homeopathy and other sort of alternative medicine, is because of the concept of clinical trials. So these clinical trials, they are done in any modern medicine that you are taking. They have been done and they have been accessed and they have been verified by experts. So these clinical trials are done to assess the safety and efficacy of the drug or the vaccine which has been manufactured. And this can only be done after health authority and ethics authority approval. You cannot really claim that you have a new drug and start your clinical trial without informing anybody else. And it's also mandatory to state the purpose of your clinical trial. So sometimes it happens that the medicine that you're testing for does not work for what you're testing, but it might work for something else. Then you cannot say that, oh, I was doing the trial originally for this something else only. It was not my intention to test it for whatever I was supposed to test. So that you cannot say. You have to be clear in the beginning for what you are testing. So this first stage is to do some pilot trials, and these are usually done in non-humans, mostly monkeys and chimpanzees and so on. And then sometimes in very low quantity of humans, maybe like 10 people they would do it. And they are usually double blind. So that means the person who is giving the medicine does not know whether that is a medicine or a placebo, and the person who is taking the medicine also does not know if they have been given the actual medicine or the placebo. So this placebo is sort of like a harmless drug. Sometimes it is a sugar pill, sometimes it's a saline water. If you're doing a vaccine trial, then it might be a different vaccine which has been already passed by the health board, and you are giving that vaccine and saying that it's okay. Anyway, so this is the concept of a placebo. And then it's randomized. So it's not like somebody determines before that the fifth person will be getting the medicine. So if something like this happens, then it's very easy to manipulate. So the fifth person, you would be free to choose who is that fifth person, something like that. So it's sort of randomized. Somebody is sitting, there is a computer program somewhere, and then it is randomizing the number of people who are coming, and then giving them either the medicine or the placebo. And informed consent is important. So you have to explain to the person who is getting what they are getting. or what they are not getting, or something like that. And that was a problem with Covaxin, because there was a trial in Bhopal where the people were not informed that they were part of a vaccine trial. They thought that they were getting the vaccine. Everybody was getting the vaccine, but it was not true. Some of them were getting the placebo. So you have to inform them that you were in a trial. Otherwise, that whole trial was discarded. It could not use the data and so on. And then there is a concept of confidence intervals. So so people don't really say that this is 100% effective. They say that it is 95% effective with this much confidence. So that means the actual range is between certain 2%, and the percentage which they are most confident about, they state it. So if you say that the Moderna vaccine is 95% effective, it does not mean that for everybody it is 95% effective for all the trials. It really means that it is effective between 80 to 100%, but we are most sure about the 95% thing, that it is almost sure that it is 95% effective and something like that. And again, this was a problem with the phase 2 trials of Covaxin, where the confidence interval was too large. It was sort of like 30 or 40 percentage points, something like that. And that was a problem, because you don't know if you have a 40 percentage point range. It might be, say, somebody says the 50 to 90%. It might be 90%, it might be 50%. If it is 50%, then it is worthless. So if it is 90%, it's very good. So you don't really know if the confidence interval is too large. Anyway, so there are phases in the clinical trial. So the phase 0 is just preliminary data generation. Phase 2 is screening for safety with very low participations. Phase 2 is then establishing this whether that a particular medicine or the vaccine is effective in a control group. Again, it is like maybe 100 people or 200 people. And then the phase 3, which is more widely spread, it is done in different regions. It is done in different nationalities. It takes into account different people in different socioeconomic strata and so on. And then it is tested for both safety, efficacy in larger settings. And once all of this is cleared, then you have the medicine or the vaccine. And then in phase 4, you look at real world safety. So it's not the case that if you have taken the vaccine for COVID, it's not that everything has done, the study has been completed. They're still tracking it, because phase 4 is quite important. If in real world it behaves in a different way than what it was showing in the phase 3, then it makes no sense to keep on giving the vaccine if it is not working in the real world and so on. So these are the phases of a clinical trial, and this is how most of the modern medicine or modern vaccines are made. But this type of clinical trials or this type of methodology is not taken by alternative medicines, homeopathy, even Ayurveda, and acupuncture, and all of this, like Chinese traditional medicines and so on. So they don't really do all of these things. They are mostly anecdotal. So they would be something like, oh, this person has got cured by taking this herb, so maybe you also will get cured. And that person takes the herb, and probably the body has already fought that infection and it gets cured after 3 days, but that person might start to believe that the herb was acting, and he might suggest it, or she might suggest it for 10 different people, and in that way, like, it spirals out of control. So people start to believe, even if they don't get the same relief. So for example, again, I have a personal experience of this. So I had this problem with tonsil when I was young, and my sister also had this problem with tonsils. So I was given some sort of like herbal remedy to cure it, and my tonsil, it became okay, there was no problem. But my sister, it was not cured, and the reason which was given was that the herb was given to me by the person who gave me the herb. He died, and his son gave the herb to my sister. So the potency of the herb, it sort of like decreased after the generation. So it has absolutely no scientific basis, and it probably did not work for me as well. And somehow the body just got over that infection, and it coincided with the time that I was taking the herb. So it was also important to mention that I was taking it with honey. So maybe the honey works, not the other thing. Anyway, so this is an example of how this sort of thing, they spiral out of control. So in the rest of the time, let me check how much I have. So I have about 10 minutes, and I would like to say how pseudoscience is propagated and what are the sources and so on. So the main way how pseudoscience is propagated is by fake news, by biased reporting, and by propaganda, which may be government propaganda or which might be personal propaganda. So fake news, you already know. Biased reporting, there are many examples of biased reporting where the whole picture is not given, okay? And then out of that part of the picture, you might think that something is working, but it's not really working. Then there is government propaganda. So if you have an Ayush ministry, so India has an Ayush ministry where H stands for homeopathy. And if you have a ministry, then that minister, who is unfortunately from Assam, he was the ex-chief minister of Assam. So if that person is in charge of the ministry, he has to propagate that homeopathy works. Otherwise, he has to remove that H from his ministry's name. So it's very sad that this sort of government propaganda is also working. And you will see, if you follow the Twitter account of Ayush Ministry, they give ridiculous things as like information for treating diseases, especially COVID. Another aspect in which pseudoscience is propagated is by weak journals. So if the journal is accepting something which is not scientifically proven, and people might say that, okay, I have proved this in a scientific journal, so it is true, and things like that. So normal people, they would not really understand that there are different types of scientific journals, different ways that you can publish in a scientific journal. So they would take it in face value. Then the other, I think, which is very important, is institutes which propagate pseudoscience. So for example, in BHU, you can do a bachelor's degree or diploma degree in Vastu Shastra and astrology. So which I think is, I mean, I don't see the point of like really doing a master's or a PhD in that whole area. I mean, it's sort of, I would understand if it is like the social impact of studying astrology or treating with astrology, or health impacts of that or something like that, but from a sociological point of view, but not from a scientific point of view. And then I'm very sad to say also, to give the example of Tezpur University, which tried to have a PhD course in astrology and human health. And when it was questioned, then the person who was in charge, they simply dropped it from the list of subjects which was offered, and they never gave an explanation why it was offered in the first place. So I had some interactions with the person, and that person refused to answer it clearly, why that person wanted that course, or what was the logic behind that course. So I would also like to reiterate again that bad science is not pseudoscience. So there are many examples of bad science which are corrected as we go along, but that is not pseudoscience. For example, hydroxychloroquine, which was touted as an example for cure of COVID in the early days, which was disproved quite convincingly that it does not work at all. Then in India, there was this trend of, I don't know if it still exists, of spraying homes of COVID-positive patients with disinfectant after 15 days when the virus has no potency at all, and spraying it and charging money like 5,000 rupees for each spray or something like that. Then this concept of like testing after 15 days or 20 days. So a person is no longer infectious, and this is known from science, that a person is no longer infectious after 10 days of acquiring the virus. So there is no reason, scientific reason, to really test that person. Even if that person is showing some symptoms, it's because the body is not flushed out properly, but it does not mean that the person is infecting others. So for example, in the UK, they don't really test people after 10 days. Only in very rare cases they test it. So this is an example of bad science, that they're keeping on testing, because it's a waste of resources, it's a waste of time, and it's a waste of public money, which is quite important. So what are the characters of pseudoscience? I've been giving some examples, but all of them really share certain characters. The first is that they have a deficient or superficial knowledge of the thing that they're claiming to understand. For example, homeopathic doctors, they think that they understand how human body works, but they don't really. Second is proposals based on faulty understanding. For example, perpetual motion machines. You know from physics that this is impossible, but then you will still see people who will claim that they have made such a machine. They think that science is unnecessarily complicated, and they say that, okay, my theory is much easier than Einstein's theory, so it must be true because simplicity is always better than complexity. And this is completely wrong. They have very high level of confidence about their theory, and they don't want to hear anything against that theory or that medicine or things like that. No one can disagree with what they have said, and if someone dares to disagree, then they will start to like abuse and fight or whatever. They have an over reliance on personal testimony and patterns of data. Like I showed you spurious correlation. They also look at like random data and try to generate things from that random data. And they feel that nothing is a coincidence. So it might happen that it's a coincidence that I'm thinking of somebody and that person calls me. It is a coincidence. It can happen. So miracles like this happen many times. But the people who believe in like ESP or telekinesis, they would think that, oh, this person knew that I was thinking about that person and so on. So they don't believe in coincidences. And they abuse statistics, as I already mentioned. Like they would look at some sort of graph and they would try to get meaning from that, which is not really correct. So how can it harm? And there are many ways that pseudoscience can harm, but these are the 5 most important things which I feel it harms the most. So it harms in policy making. For example, if an university like Tezpur University and its Center for Interdisciplinary Research claims to support pseudoscientific things like astrology, then it has a very big impact on policy making, because because academics in TU, they have a how do I say, hand in the policy making of Assam or of the Northeast, and if somebody who believes in this sort of thing, they are in a policy making position, then that person would inherently have this bias, and they would try to show that bias in the policies that they make. And this is very important not to do that. Second is health. If you follow certain alternative medicines which don't work, and if you don't seek correct medication, then that person, Ramdev, is abusing the doctors. So that sort of thing will happen in journalism if you tend to believe in pseudoscience. Then politics, of course. So, I mean, if your politicians or your policy making is weak and you tend to believe in pseudoscience, then it will have a direct impact on the politics of the day, which is happening in many places in the world, actually. So who to read? I have told you about many things, but who to read? I mean, where do you get the idea? Where do you get your own knowledge? So when you are trying to read something, you should also look at who is writing that thing. So that author must have some minimum training. So I mean, in the sense that I have the minimum training, in the sense that I have been trained in how to do science. So I can speak about the scientific method, for example. And next, you have to look at, if I'm writing a book and I'm self-publishing it and nobody reviews it, then it's meaningless. Maybe that book is completely wrong. Who knows? So the publisher has to be mainstream, or it has to be reviewed by scientists. If the publisher is not mainstream, it has to be reviewed by scientists who say good things about the book or about the paper or something like that. And it has to contain references and citations. It has not to be something like, okay, I believe that this and this is true. So it's okay, you can believe something, but has somebody else also thought in the same way as you? Or do you have some experimental backing to show that your belief is correct? So it should contain certain references and citations. And you have to look if the claims are too extravagant. Does it say that aliens invaded the earth 20,000 years ago and made the pyramids? That is sort of a preposterous, extravagant claim, which is never going to be true. So, or does it say that everyone else is wrong? Does it say that my theory is correct and nobody believes me because I don't come from the traditional way of thinking or something like that? If these sort of things are said, then that person is not really trustworthy. And you should read more than one book in an area, of course. So, I mean, if your knowledge is based on only one point of view, then it's a biased knowledge again. And you should avoid things like resonance, vibration, or aura, or like strings or something like that. So if somebody says that the vibration of the universe is causing you to do certain things, then that is completely like nonsense. There is no vibration of the universe which is doing anything. So for example, I think last year or the year before that, Kiran Bedi shared that the sound that the universe makes is Om, and which is completely like, I don't know, I mean, she's a well-educated person, so I can't really believe that she believes in all those sort of things. Anyway, so this is like towards the end. So this is an actual update from somebody in Facebook, and this was given by that person after last year or the year before that, when it was announced that you have to like light these diyas in honor of the doctors who were fighting for COVID, or the health care professionals who were fighting for COVID. And that person who teaches physics, that person modified that thing into all this sort of nonsense, which is like optical wave, brain wave, and things like that. So it says, when my brain wave and optical wave through light matches with yours, physics ensures that there is resonance. And this resonance will kill all the coronavirus particles and so on. So let's try it for 9 minutes at 9 p.m. on 5th. So this is an example of how pseudoscience is directly harming. So this person teaches physics, and that person is writing this sort of nonsense. And there are like 77 people who have liked it or loved it, or I don't know, some of them have laughed at it. I think one of them is me. But these are sort of like things, and many people, and I had this long conversation in similar threads with this person's followers, and it turned out that many of the people tend to believe all these sort of things, even if they're studying like physics. So I mean, all of these are like physical terms: optical wave, resonance. These are terms in physics which people have a concrete way of defining, but that does not really translate into what this person is saying. So this is an example, and this is another example of a very long comment which I received in an update of mine, which is about the present coronavirus vaccines which are going on, and it's full of pseudoscientific things which I'm sure now you will identify. So, for example, the first line says that the lawsuit for global crimes against humanity filed and accepted by the Superior Court of Justice of Canada has begun. A team of more than 10,000 lawyers and more than 10,000 medical experts led by German Rainer Fulmick, one of the most powerful lawyers in Europe, has launched a lawsuit in history called Nuremberg 2 against WHO, World Economic Forum, for crimes against humanity, and so on. And then everything that that person says is about this person who is the lawyer. So like Rainer Fulmick, he has no training in medicine, and that person is not a doctor. So he's a lawyer, and that person is doing something, and this person goes on to explain what is happening and so on. And then he quotes extensively from Fulmick and so on. And then the references that he give are all YouTube videos of Fulmick saying something. So Fulmick saying something, which is, I mean, if you have followed the talk, you will understand that this is not a reliable thing to look at. So this is an example of how people like, you will see that this person has written so much, and then you might think that, okay, maybe he's correct. He's given so many links and so on. If you don't look at the links, you will not understand. Even if you look at the links, you might not understand that what this person is saying is completely nonsense. So these are like real world examples which you can see in social media and which has happened to me. So I can show it to you. So now, like towards the end, what to read? Why should you follow what I'm saying? So you should not. That is the whole point of the talk. If somebody random person is saying you something, you should not really believe everything. So what you should do is you should go back and look at material which is already available, written by experts, and you should try to understand what is being said. And if you don't understand something, then you should talk to other people who are better aware of the things, or who are in a better position to explain them to you. But it is important that you read and you understand. So I want to give you some like materials, and this is a very subjective, this is a very like objective list, because in the sense that these are books that I've read and enjoyed, and there are like hundreds and hundreds of books which are probably better, which I've not read, so I cannot really say about them. So I mean, these are like 4 books which talks about some of the things which I mentioned. So the first 2 are called Debunked and Exposed, and these are written by Henry Brock and Georges Chapak. So Chapak was a Nobel Prize winning physicist, and it's amazing that this Nobel Prize winner has written a book on pseudoscience. So these are very small books, like 150 pages, and they explain some of the tricks, like walking in coal that you have seen like Babas do, or people putting hand in molten lead or something like that, lead or something like that. So these are all things which can be explained by science. You don't really need some extra superstitious things to really explain them. So these 2 books explain them quite well. The third is called Frauds, Myths and Mysteries, and this is about archaeological frauds which have been done throughout history. But the good thing about this book, so it's the 7th edition, because I have read the 7th edition, but there is now a 10th edition, which I'm sure it's much better than this. So this book explains in the first part what is science, what is pseudoscience, why people tend to believe in pseudoscience, how pseudoscience believers are enabled by the system, and so on. So it's a nice, like the first 100 pages, it's a nice primer on pseudoscience. The 4th is a book called Bad Science, and this is written by doctors who were killing patients because they did not know the concept of like bacteria being harmful for patients and so on. So it's a book, it's a very short book, and it also explains how the scientific method works. The next book is another interesting like essays on different people and how they made mistakes and how science corrected the bias in their inherent bias in their experiments, to understand all of these concepts of conformal bias that I talked about. And I think these are the last set of books. So I have talked about astrology, and I mean, I believe that if you don't read something about that, then you should not really speak, because you would not understand how it works. And for that, I recommend this book, Conversing with the Planets. It's a difficult to read book, in the sense that the writing is not very clear at some points, but I would say that it's a masterful treatment of how astrology created really our understanding of the world. Then the next is False Positive, which explains which looks at 1 year in the papers that were published in New England Journal of Medicine, which is a very prestigious medicine journal, and why a lot of the studies which were published here is not really correct. So it's by a doctor, and it is instructive in the sense that why all research is not valid research, or why all science is not good science. Next is COVID by Numbers, which is a very latest book written by Spiegelhalter and Masters. And it's a very entertaining book to show you how statistics can explain a lot of things which is happening right now in the world. And the last book is about the story of medicine. Medicine was not always like what we think medicine is now. And this book gives a very nice overview of how medicine went through all of these transitions, taking into account why medicine is not very suitable for women in general, because all of the medical practitioners were really men who were only focused on diagnosis of or the anatomy of men. So I think it's a very important book, and it's a quite nice book to read as well. So I mean, I'm sorry for going over time. I went about 12 minutes over time. I'm happy to take any questions if you have now.
Thank you, sir, for this highly enriching talk. It was truly enlightening, and I'm sure the curiosity or dilemma that everyone shared over the topic of pseudoscience versus science is answered to some extent. So, without any further ado, we will start the interactive session. So, if anyone, I think people have dropped their questions in the chat box already. There's a quick announcement.
So let me check.
Yes, sir. There's a quick announcement. If somehow we get disconnected, you can join through the link in the chat box for the interactive session.
So should I take like one by one, or?
Sir, I'll state the questions. You can answer.
Okay.
Okay. So the first question is by Partha Pratim Debnath. It is the question is placebo effect a pseudoscience too?
No, because we understand quite well how placebo works. So the way how like placebo works is you were tricked into believing that you were getting the correct treatment or whatever, no? So the body is somehow tricked, or the mind is somehow tricked, but it's not pseudoscience because this placebo control is used in all of the clinical trials, most of the clinical trials that we done. So I mean, so there are studies which shows that homeopathy and placebo is the same thing. So that would show that homeopathy is pseudoscience, not placebo is pseudoscience, because the rate of success of homeopathy and the rate of success of taking a placebo is the same.
Thank you, sir. The next, it's a question. I don't think so it's a question, but it's Atyazal said that, like about the Capricorn example, he said that, like about astrology, you said that example of Capricorn, it also signifies multiple life after concepts are pseudoscience too.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Okay. So the next question is by Yashaswati Bharali. The question is, astrology and alchemy are mostly known as proto-science rather than pseudoscience. So what differentiates proto-science from pseudoscience or even science?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on why, like, you would say that alchemy is, yeah, I mean, okay. So proto-science is something like a non-scientific field becoming a scientific field later on, okay? But in the case of like alchemy, I would not say that it is sort of like that. It's sort of reverse in the sense that at that point, alchemy had certain scientific basis in the sense that the Aristotelian theory, it said that everything was made of these 4 elements. So if you have only 4 elements which are making things, then it's possible that by mixing these 4 elements in different concentrations or in different proportions, you could in principle make many other things, or you could transform one thing into the other by knowing exactly what proportions of different things you have to take. So in that sense, alchemy at that point could be thought of as science. I mean, it's not too far away actually. In fact, until the time of Newton also, people were really looking into alchemy, because modern chemical science or the research, modern chemical research, it only started in the 17th century. People like Lavoisier, for example, they started to do these experiments. So even Lavoisier had this had this, I think Lavoisier had this theory of caloric theory, which was not really science, but at that time it was thought to be science. So it's a bit problematic to really demarcate all of these things. So as I said, the demarcation problem is a very difficult problem in the philosophy of science. What is science? What is pseudoscience? Or what is proto-science?
Thank you, sir. The next question is by Abhilash Biswas. What about yoga? It deals with astrology, Ayurveda, Vastu Shastra, and also alchemy.
Yeah, I think one point that one must take from the talk, or one must take from what I've said, is that, or at least not from me, then from this famous philosopher called Ludwig Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein had this very famous book called Tractatus Philosophico-Logicus. And there was this line which I really like in Wittgenstein's book, which is that whereof you don't understand, thereof you must be silent. So I don't really understand yoga at this point. So that is why I did not mention anything about yoga. I mean, I understand how astrology works. So I mentioned about astrology. I understand how homeopathy works. I understand how a little bit about how Ayurveda works. So I explain all of these things. But yoga, I don't really understand at this point. So I don't want to comment on something which I don't really understand properly.
Thank you, sir. The next question is by Uchakanki Kashyap. The question is, like many scientists claim that an ordinary people use only 10% of its brain. So if we are able to get the access to increase it to 100%, then according to them, we could be able to do telekinesis like shown in the Lucy film. So can you explain, is it a pseudoscience belief?
Yes, because who are the scientists who say that you can only use 10% of your brain? So can you give me citation? Can you give me a citation of the actual research which has been done which shows that you can use only 10% of the brain? If you can, then I'm willing to engage in this question.
Okay, so the next question is by Madhurya Mohan Kashyap. He says, Namaskar Manjil sir, it is Madhurya here. My question on pseudoscience is that in general, we have seen that the popularity of or spreading of pseudoscience is much faster than actual scientific thoughts. So what will be the steps that we have to undertake to prevent as a science student?
Yeah, it's a very important question. And unfortunately, I don't have a really foolproof answer to that because I also think about this a lot. So as a scientist or as a mathematician or as a technologist, I think it's the duty of every one of us to really try to dispel this falsehoods about pseudoscience from the society. But it's a very uphill task. So I don't really have a formula or a one-shot answer to give about this. But I think it's important that one must read, one must understand how science is done, and one must be able to verify oneself whether something that you are reading is science or it's not. And only after that, you should try to explain to people that this is not science. So, I mean, if you look at, I don't know. So, I mean, I have a lot of people in my immediate family or in my immediate friend circle who believe in a lot of these things, which I have been saying that these are false. So I did not tell them when I was like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would not question their beliefs. But now I do, because now I think I'm in a position where I can explain to them why that is wrong. So I think one must go to that certain stage where you understand properly what is science, how to differentiate it from pseudoscience, and what are these pseudoscientific beliefs. So, I mean, if somebody wants to argue with me about homeopathy, I can argue because I know how homeopathy works. I know what are the principles of homeopathy and so on. So you should understand that, because unless you do that, it's very easy for people to really give you some statement which is completely untrue, but which you will not be able to say that it is untrue, because you would not be able to discard that in a proper scientific way. So I think there are certain steps that you have to take. First, you have to understand, and then you have to assimilate what you understood, and then you have to look at people who are already doing these things. For example, like the Volcker did that. You should look at certain people who are in Twitter. For example, Saibi Phillips is a doctor from Kerala who dispels a lot of these pseudoscientific things related to medicine. So you should look at how they work, and then you should understand take their examples and then try to like form your own sort of methodology to do this. But it's a gradual process, and it's a lot of it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort, in the sense that you have to really read and understand many of these things. But I'm glad that you asked this question, and I would say that as scientists or as mathematicians or as technologists, all of us have this inherent how do I say this, inherent responsibility to explain it. And since you and I are product of the public education output or public education system, so we have more of a moral responsibility to also explain to the society that all of these things are really problematic. I mean, I would only say that much.
Thank you, sir. So I guess these are the questions we had for the interactive session. With this interactive session coming to an end, I would like to conclude this meeting. I sincerely extend my gratitude to Dr. Manjil Saikia for his valuable time and knowledge that he shared with us. I would also like to thank all the people who joined this meeting. I hope that this talk helped you get a better hold on the topic of pseudoscience and the debate on going over pseudoscience versus science. Thank you, everyone. And yes, thank you for joining this meeting. We can conclude here.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So I'm happy to stay back if somebody wants to chat. I don't know.
Yes, sir. So we have we have created, if this meeting ends, because it was a scheduled meeting, there's a meeting created already, and it's in the chat box. So anyone wants to do an interaction, they can join through that meeting also.
Yeah, okay. So should I shift to that?
Sir, no, if the meeting ends. Otherwise,
I see. Okay. Yeah, so yeah. I'm happy to like stay behind and talk.
Yeah,
if you're interested in having chat.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I mean, it's better if you close the.
Sir, someone said, yeah. Yes. Partha Pratim Devnath said one can take away from this wonderful talk is to answer more questions, is to ask more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you should ask. So I'm also happy to see so many people. Actually, I was not expecting that.
Yes, sir. Many people turned out. Yeah, and people are streaming from YouTube also. Before the talk, it was released in YouTube, and people are showing responses over there as well.
Yeah, I mean, don't be shy. So, I mean, if you want to say something, even if it is like criticism or something bad to me, I don't mind. I'm happy to indulge.
Anyone?
Or I mean, otherwise also any other topic that you would like to discuss, because I was also in your stage, no? So I studied integrated MSc. I was in the first batch.
Yes, sir.
So I'm happy to also answer other things. So I'm quite impressed by the events of inSCIgnis, by the way. So congratulations to the team.
Yes,
it's very nice.
So we have got many additional events this year, new ones, and the old ones are carrying forward with, we have 5 national conferences this time, seminars that are going to be arranged on 1st.
So, I mean, if you're interested, you should probably invite like this person called Dr. Elizabeth Bick. She gives online talks. I mean, not for inSCIgnis, but in general. No? She is quite, I'll write her name. So
sure.
I'm sure that she would be interested in talking to students. She's sort of like a person who explains where bad science occurs, mostly in biology.
Okay, sir. So we'll contact her.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think
in general also for other SSC programs, we can contact her.
And then I think Vishal left, so there was this person called Vishal Dev who is doing his PhD in London. So his supervisor is also a person who I'm not sure if he will give a talk, but you should look at his work.
Vishal Dev, okay. We have the technical team as well, sir, over here. All of them are working constantly.
Yeah, it's very nice to see. The updates, the posters, everything is very nice.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
So I think when the first Science Day was organized by integrated MSc students, it was in the council hall for I think half an afternoon.
Oh.
So from that, I think it was increased.
It has grown, yeah, a lot. So 3-day event this time. Sir, another question is, without demanding
I see,
things done.
Yeah, so no benefit, then people are practicing in India. Yeah, so do you think in order to differentiate it? Well, this has happened many times actually. So one of the books that I suggested was something called Thomas Kuhn and the Science Wars. So this concept of science wars has been going on, and it's not only about religion, it's about something called postmodernism. So, I mean, postmodernists and scientists have been at wars with, not war in the literal sense, but wars in journals and articles for a long time. And I don't see that happening with religion and science, because people understand that religion is not entirely scientific. It's faith-based, and science is not faith-based. It's more to do with methods. So I don't see a war happening, but I'm sure that pseudoscience is not going to be eradicated from the society anytime soon. So it will still be there. I don't mind it being there if it does not do any harm. So that's the point. It should not do any harm. And if you see somebody being harmed, then it's problematic. So that's the point. I mean, I would say that it's impossible to eradicate pseudoscience. Yeah, so there's another question by Manas, who said that Greek people were likely the first one to talk about science. You said like some of their theories were wrong. So the theories that proposed were okay. So these were not pseudoscientific, because because it followed sort of like the scientific method. So it was not like something which they thought about, which they thought that, okay, I think this is true, and so it must be true. Some of those things were like that, but you have to also look at the cultural paradigm or the time when it was being done. So if you do things like that at this point, then they would be pseudoscientific for sure. But when those things were being done then, the concept of science itself was not clear what is science, because it did not exist at all. So I would not say that it was pseudoscience. I would not even say that it was bad science. I would say it was still science, but science in a very nascent, very baby-like form. And one has to look things from different perspectives. So one thing that I learned is that there is not always one way of looking at things. Okay, so there are many different ways of looking at things, and there are many different aspects of all of the things. If you look at the Greek society only in terms of science, then it is a wrong thing. You have to also look at society in terms of the economy that they had, in terms of the culture that they had, in terms of the religious beliefs that they had, and all of these together would give you a complete picture of what their science meant for them. So for us now, if you look at what our religious beliefs or what our economic or what our cultural beliefs are, then we have a very clear idea of what is science and what is not science. So in that sense, you also need to understand all of these things to really grasp at what the Greeks were doing. So no, they were not pseudoscientific, nor they were bad science. They were science which was really very early stages of science or scientific history.
I guess these are the questions. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you are interested to talk to me, I am happy to take in some more questions. So I have shared the email ID.
Oh, yes.
So it's quite easy. So it's my first name at lastname.in. So you can just write to me, and I'm also happy.
Sir, do you vouch for the idea that science is the only truth?
Yeah, again, since this is a philosophy of science truth, then you must also define what is truth, because I know what is science, but what is truth? So there is a branch of thing called epistemology, okay? So which says that how do you know what you know? So it's also a very interesting philosophical question. And I would not say that it is the only truth, but for me, I would say it is my truth.
We're getting a lot of questions. That's good. I mean, people are interacting. Anyone? Anyone else?
Okay, so maybe we can end.
Yeah, we
for
can
today.
end. Sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much,
Thank you, sir.
Upashita, and
Yeah.
thank you the team, all of the
Yes,
members
sir.
who are working behind the scenes.
Yes, sir. All of them are there.
So best of luck for the other events. And
Thank you,
for
sir.
inviting me.
It was a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, sir. Good night.